What is going on, everybody? In this video we are going to be showing how to spin up a Raspberry Pi 3 and also install Docker and Docker Compose on that Raspberry Pi. That being said, let's jump right in. So pretty straightforward. They have what's called Imager now, or Raspberry Pi Imager, which makes it a lot easier. Before, you used to have to burn the ISO to a USB using something like Etcher, and that made a few stumbling blocks. But Pi Imager is really nice for just spinning up a Raspberry Pi very quickly. There are a few things I don't really care for in the latest version, but we'll get to that in a moment. So I am on Linux Mint, which is built off of Ubuntu. So I'm going to click the Ubuntu for x86. If you're on Windows or Mac OS, choose the appropriate version. And it's a pretty quick download, as you saw. And if you are on Linux, you might get a warning saying there's an older version of the software already in channel. What that means is you could just come out here and do sudo apt-get install RPI Imager. But that is a version or two behind. I believe that's 1.7.5 at the time of this recording, and the latest version I want to say is 1.8.5, even though looking back here it says 1.8.1. And this would say install package. If I didn't already have it installed, you'd just click that. Probably have to put in your password and you would be good to go. Okay, so once that is installed, well, we just need a few things. We do need a SD card to write our Raspberry Pi OS to. In my case, the SD to USB dongle, whatever you want to call it, that came with my Raspberry Pi eventually just kind of broke down and didn't write images well anymore. So for, I want to say $47, I went to Best Buy and got a Samsung SD to USB converter. And it also came with a 256 gig SD card, which I thought was a good deal. And I like buying things like everyone else. And it's USB 3, I should mention. The one that came with the Raspberry Pi, I'm not sure if it was 1 or 2, but it was a lot slower. So pardon me while I lean over and put that into the back of my PC. Okay, and you can tell that's inserted because you see I've already written to it. But let's go ahead and fire up Raspberry Pi Imager. So if I just search for Imager, well, it should have come up. Let's try that again. Not sure what I hovered over. Okay, so choose device. Well, I'm doing a Raspberry Pi 3, which is 32-bit. The Raspberry Pi 4 is 64-bit. So just be aware of that. They're not interchangeable. So if I come down here, I'm going to do Raspberry Pi 3. And actually, I believe that comes with a desktop environment, which I don't really need. Oh, sorry, that is the next option. So Pi 3, choose the OS. Yes, desktop environment. So I want other. And I'm going to do light, just meaning I'm only going to get a terminal, but I'm just going to SSH to it, so that should not be an issue. Choose storage. I see my Samsung USD card reader here. And if I go next, I already have some settings in here that I just kind of roll through. Makes it real easy to spin up the Raspberry Pis, turn them around. But just so we can see it, we'll go to Edit Settings. And this here is not terribly important, but pretty important. It's going to create an MDNS record. And if you're not familiar with networking, you can kind of just fast forward. But MDNS means in my network, in my home. When I want to connect to this machine and I just say Pi 3, it's going to shout out to all the devices and say, hey, I'm looking for Pi 3. And my Raspberry Pi is going to say, oh, I am Pi 3, and here is my IP address. And that's going to allow us to connect a lot easier. Okay, set username and password. I do not enable username and password logins, but as of a few versions ago, they don't give you the default Pi user. So if you don't fill in this information, it's not going to allow you to SSH right to it because it wants you to create a user, and then you'll need to get out a monitor, hook it up to the Pi, and then go through those steps. So just be aware of that. If you're like, oh, I'm not going to log in with a username and password, you still have to set that. And I usually go with the username Gary. I put in a password. I configured my wireless, so the Pi will automatically connect to my home Wi-Fi, and then we can get to that without having to connect to the Wi-Fi while logged into the Pi. And I just set my country. I am in the United States. My time zone is Chicago, and my keyboard layout is US. So services allow public key authentication only, which is what I typically use for the Raspberry Pis. I think based on the username you put in, it automatically searches in your .ssh directory for an SSH key to use. I think I've got a whole bunch in there. It chose this one, probably because it was ID_RSA. If you did not have any SSH keys, you could do the run SSH keygen, which would then put the public key on your Raspberry Pi and the public key being retained on your PC. Okay, so let's go ahead. Would you like to apply OS customization settings? Yes. And we will go ahead and write that. It just wants our local password for our PC to do this operation. I think with the USB 3 SD to USB converter I have, this only takes about 5 minutes, but we'll leave it off here and pick back up once the image has been written. All right, that wasn't too bad. Probably less than 5 minutes, but we get this pop-up saying, hey, I've written this OS to the SD card. So we can just continue. And pardon while I reach over to the back of my PC and go ahead, get the SD card. Not sure if that's in focus or not. And my favorite Raspberry Pi, the Pi 3, just because the fan on the 4 is just a little bit noisy. I don't know, makes me a little jumpy. And then I'm just going to shake the camera, I guess, and find my power adapter. Probably should have organized all this before recording. And just go ahead and plug that in. And I'll give that a moment to spin up. And in the back here, if you're not familiar, there's a red light and a green light. In my experience, if you do not see the green light, that's bad. I don't know, blow out the back, reinsert the SD card. Probably not scientific, kind of like blowing into the old Nintendo cartridges. It just makes you feel better and gives you something to do, but I think that counts for a lot. All right. And while that's coming up, well, now we need to way to find our Raspberry Pi. If you have access to your home router, you can log in there and go to your DHCP and see what IP address it's getting assigned. You could also do an Nmap scan of your network if you're familiar with that utility. In my case, I have an app on my phone called Fing, F-I-N-G. It's a free app. It's pretty nifty. You can just hit scan and it will show you all your devices, cell phones, any kind of Chromecast, smart home devices, all that good stuff. And I like it as well because sometimes the Pi takes a little bit of time to come up. So once I see the name in Fing, I know it's up and running. Same with DHCP or an Nmap scan. Once you see it, you should be able to get to it. So I'm going to give that just another moment. And also we should be able to get to it by its name, Pi 3. But sometimes that can go a little sideways too. So I'm going to just go ahead. I don't see it yet, but I'm going to open a terminal and SSH. The username we set was Gary, and it's Pi 3. While that's running, I'm going to do a refresh on my app, see if it's coming up yet. I do see it. And it shouldn't have grabbed another IP address. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and in Fing, it's a pretty nice app. It actually has a ping function. So my average ping is 16 milliseconds. It should be up. So I'm not sure what is going on here. Oh, you know what? I don't think it'll make a difference, but I'm going to go ahead. And I'm usually connected to a VPN, so I'm going to just disconnect. Okay. Well, you learn as you go. So my VPN, so if you have a VPN running, disconnect from that. And that was just an error message. I was typing and not thinking, saying, hey, I have already connected to this device on this IP, but there's an issue with it because you have a brand new OS burnt to the Raspberry Pi, and it gives us this nifty little command to run. Should sort everything out. All right, and so here we are on the Raspberry Pi. Now, what we want to do is install Docker, and we want to not only install Docker, but a 32-bit ARM version, which is the architecture that Raspberry Pi uses. So this one isn't too bad. Docker install Raspberry Pi 32-bit, which is what we want. This command here, make this a little bigger. Just if you have had Docker versions in the past installed, brand new OS, we do not need to worry about that. And so if we scroll down, and if you're not familiar with this, you don't really need to worry about it, but this is going to make Docker a source for installing and updating. It's a lot better if you're Googling out there and you see like a standalone, I don't know, like a .sh. That's going to be a program you download and it just sits there. It doesn't get updated, doesn't get security patches. So I always prefer to have something like this where it is actually a repository that my computer can go look at and say, hey, is there anything that needs to be updated? And because I'm lazy or efficient, I just usually grab all that. And let me close this so I don't get confused with my terminals. And I'm just going to nano install Docker to make a file called install Docker. And in here, I can paste this and a few other commands we will need. Let's see, post install Linux Docker, sudo add the group Docker, paste that there. And then just to kind of simulate like we're logging out and logging back in, or actually this is going to add our user to Docker, the group, so we can run it. And this new GRP is going to kind of simulate logging out, logging back in, so then those groups and permissions are applied, and we can then run Docker. And a mistake I've made in the past, we've added it as a repository. We've made our system aware of it. With the update, it's going to look at our repositories that we have available. We're going to make a group called Docker, add ourselves to it, but then we actually need to install Docker. So if we come down here, or maybe I scrolled past that. There we go. Okay. And actually, probably put that here, it makes sense. I feel like I may have double pasted that, but that's okay. Control X and then Y to save the modified buffer. Enter to say, hey, we just want to keep this name. We need to make this an executable, so chmod plus X for executable, and you can tab through there, install Docker / just to run it. And that's going to take maybe 5-10 minutes. You might get a password prompt, I'm not sure, but I will leave off here and come back once that's finished installing. Okay, so not too bad, maybe 5 minutes, but now we have Docker installed, so we can test it as always with the good old Docker run hello world. Unable to find image locally. Well, it's a fresh install, that makes sense, so it's just going to go download that and run the container real quick, so we are good to go there. So a few things I maybe should have done right off the bat: sudo apt-get update and sudo apt-get upgrade. Just be aware of that. Always good practice when you spin up a new machine with Linux. But that being said, I want to put UFW on here, the uncomplicated firewall. Let's see. I guess I do need to apt-get update just to make that known as a package that can be installed. And that should be pretty quick. So let's see, sudo UFW allow to allow traffic. We could say SSH, and actually let me clear that with Control L if you're not familiar. But I know SSH is port 22, so let's see. Install UFW. Well, now I'm kind of curious here. Oh, I didn't install it. It's been a long day. All right. And then we need to activate the firewall. I believe it's activate. Let's see. Yeah, enable. And you could always just do a -- help to see a list of commands. But I saw it there. may disrupt our current connection, makes sense. It might drop, but then because we've allowed port 82, port 22, we would be able to reconnect. In my experience, it doesn't really ever disrupt it though. I'm still connected, and we should be able to do UFW, sudo UFW status. And we can see our rules there. We have SSH allowed on IPv4 and IPv6. All right. So something a little more interesting we could do is let's go ahead and allow port 80 to treat it kind of like a web server. And then we do need to reload, I believe, if we scroll up here, reload the firewall. So sudo UFW reload. And just be aware that if you did sudo UFW allow 80, and then you spun up, say, a web server and couldn't get to it, it's most likely because you need to reload and apply those settings to the uncomplicated firewall UFW. Okay, let's go ahead and make a quick web server just so we can test this out. We can make a directory called test website. That's fine. We will change into it, and let's make a Docker file real quick. And in here, we could just do something like, actually, let me go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and just copy some Docker file stuff. Here I had ChatGPT spin up real quick, honestly, but it's going to copy a server.py file to the directory. What directory? It sets the working directory as app. It's going to expose port 80, and then it's just going to run that server. So Control X, Y to save the buffer, keep the file name. We do need a server.py file. So let's go ahead and make that real quick. Again, auto-generated code. Makes life easy. You could run any Docker file that exposes a port, allow that on UFW, and then be able to connect to it. This one I think is just a quick example. And so I'm actually going to type this out. I'm going to do Docker build. I'm going to give it the tag hello world Python. Where is this Docker file located? It is in my current directory. And while that's building, and Python Alpine should be pretty lightweight. I think the speed of the network interface in the Raspberry Pi and my home internet connection is kind of the limiting factor. This might be quicker or slower for you depending on those, on your internet speed and what Raspberry Pi you're on. But if you're following along, you're probably on a Pi 3. Okay, so we just need to Docker run and forward the port 80 to port 80, meaning, hey, in Docker, whatever is on port 80, put that to my local machine. And then we called this hello world Python, I believe. And see, that should be coming up. We should be able to go to Pi 3. Oh, HTTP, so it knows we are trying to get to a website that is Pi 3. Okay, and we do indeed have hello world. Maybe I went a little fast on that, so I could, of course, backtrack. And you see here, this is the IP of my machine, and I'm connecting to it. We could actually do another terminal real quick here, and let's just SSH back. I should be able to get to that by Pi 3. And let's see, what did we call that? We're going to go to the test website, and we are just going to cat out server.py. Going through this real quick, we are using package HTTP server and base HTTP request handler. And basically, whenever something tries to connect, it's going to respond with a packet. The header is going to be plain text, and the content is going to be hello world that we see here. So that's it for this video, but I'm hoping this kind of gets the gears going in the head. It's like, okay, I can open up ports on a Raspberry Pi and just have that running. So maybe you want to run a database, but then you run pgadmin on your local PC to connect to it. Or say you always have the Raspberry Pi checking into your PC to see if a command is waiting for it. You can offload some workloads like that. But it's just a lot of flexibility and honestly a lot of fun. You can kind of get familiar with networking. In this video, I learned, hey, if you're connected to your VPN, disconnect before you try to connect to the Pi. And also, just if you're coming from a non-Linux background, I think it's a very valuable skill. Most of the internet and technology runs on Linux, so being comfortable with a terminal is definitely a great skill to have. But hopefully you got something out of this video. Enjoyed it. If you have any feedback, comments, concerns, leave them down in the comments, and I will see you in another video.